Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, your go-to source for marketing expertise. I'm Bill Hupp, joined by the founder and president of MarketWise Advising, Mike Haldane. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited for episode 3 of the Let's Talk Growth podcast, in which we'll talk about the basics of strategy and how you need to get that right in order to have marketing success. So, Mike, let me just start. Based on your years of experience, why is strategy so important?
Well, in my experience, what I've noticed is that strategy for a lot of companies isn't done particularly well. And what I see a lot of is a whole lot of activity and busyness, but it's all pretty focused on tactics. And what oftentimes happens is you get so busy with what's going on during a particular day that you sort of lose your vision of where you're trying to go and how you're trying to go there. And so, strategy is, if you're trying to move mountains and do big things, like growing revenue, it's just really important that you have a plan to get there, and the plan is well researched and well thought out, and full of assumptions that can be validated or invalidated, with normal check-ins and all of that sort of thing. I always think of it as, if I want to take a trip and I'm going to go from point A to point B, I'm going to drive from Minneapolis to San Francisco. I need to know what my plan to get there is. What route am I going to take? Where am I going to stop? Where am I going to spend the night? Where am I going to fuel up? And those sorts of things. It's a set of guidelines that sort of help me get to where I want to be. And it's no different with business or with launching a new product or, any of those types of things. We need to understand what our objectives are, what our resources are, and how we're going to apply them in a way that gets us to where we want to be.
Can you help our audience understand mission and vision and how they impact strategy?
Sure. Really, strategy starts with this. Really, the business starts with this, or at least this should be something that comes into play pretty early in the life of a business. The mission is equivalent to the business's purpose, and that matters because people are either going to rally around a purpose or they're not. And if there's no purpose that is explicitly stated, people don't have anything to rally around other than their day-to-day activity. And that, again, that's not going to drive a good strategic plan. It's just going to drive a lot of busyness. The vision is what it looks like on the journey, which also matters a lot. So, as we think about, okay, this is our mission. Our mission is to, it could be a lot of different things depending on the business. But in the case of MarketWise, the mission is to bring better capability to our clients in terms of driving revenue growth. And the vision is what it looks like on the journey. So the vision for us is engaging one client at a time and bringing them market research, strategic planning, and the ability to execute on a daily basis so that they can achieve their goals. That's our journey. That's our vision. And both of those things really matter in terms of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And without that, we're just going to be busy doing tactical things, but with no real vision or mission in mind. There's no purpose. There's no ability to execute something bigger. It's just a set of activity.
Right. And I feel like sometimes people can be very good. Some marketers can be really good at the tactical side of things, but they don't necessarily realize that they're just solely focused on the tactics, and they're not. They think they're thinking strategically, but they're not necessarily doing so.
Yeah, it's I sort of find myself in both zones depending on the time and the day. And for me, it's kind of the equivalent of switching, pushing a button in my brain, flipping the switch, if you will, so that I can sort of step back and say, okay, I need to think about things strategically. I need to think about the forest, not the individual tree. And, to do that, you have to sort of get yourself out of that tactical mindset and think about, what is it we're really trying to accomplish here? What does the landscape look like? Who are the competitors? What is going to enable our success? That's what the strategic thinking mindset is all about. And then there's a time to execute tactically as well, where you say, I just need to write this white paper because it's got important information for our clients. and I want to get it out so that we can share that knowledge as quickly as possible. That's a very tactical endeavor, but the strategic part of it is that it's part of an education that we're trying to get out that has an impact on a whole lot of customers over time. So, both are important, and a lot of people can do both. But sometimes you have organizations that are filled with people that are either oriented in one direction or the other. And so the important part is to align people with where their strengths are, have the people that are strategically focused on the strategy, and the people that are tactically focused on the tactical things that make up the strategy.
What is typically included in a good strategic plan?
So beyond the mission and the vision, it sort of starts with the objectives of the plan, and from there it's going to talk specifically about the. So we're gonna look at objectives from a 3 to 5 year perspective. So we're gonna say, okay, we understand our mission and our vision. So what do we need to accomplish over the next 3 to 5 years to execute to that mission and vision? So it can be things around product, it can be things around revenue, could be profitability, could be cash flow, could be partnerships, could be acquisitions. A number of things could be made up to represent the 3 to 5 year objectives. You're probably going to wind up with, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 main objectives that you want to try to cover over the course of the next, let's just say, 3 years. And so then you start to say, okay, well, in order to make those objectives happen, actually take place, and that we achieve them, what are the imperatives that I need to be working on this year? So what are my strategic imperatives to enable those 3 to 5 year objectives? So you might say, well, we need to do a partnership with this company because that's going to lead to an acquisition that we want to do 3 years from now. Or it could be that we need to go out and get funding for a new product that we want to develop because that's going to have a profound impact on our top line revenue. Things along those lines. And then below that is the operating plan. And the operating plan is really mostly financial. It's really kind of your pro forma P&L, cash flow statement, balance sheet, and then that flows down to what does our staffing look like? What does our marketing spend look like? What do our sales and channel incentives look like? And then, what do we expect to get in terms of return? So if we go spend this money, what are we going to get back? So it's really all of the tactical things that need to happen in a given year from a financial and every other perspective to enable achievement of the strategic imperatives for that year, which of course enable the objectives over the 3 to 5 year period that we talked about earlier. And so in order for an operating plan to have credibility, it's going to have assumptions. And those assumptions are what we talked about, I think, back in episode 1, where we said we're going to create assumptions that allow us to calculate what we need to calculate with the operating plan, but they need to be backed by good thinking, lots of vetting, challenging conversations, and market research. And so we're going to make assumptions, but we need to test them. And not everything can be tested. Some of it just needs to play out. But as we learn, we need to be course correcting so that if our assumptions were off, it doesn't have a profound negative impact on the business or the initiative, whatever that might be. So assumptions are critical, and of course those drive the financials. So the assumptions might be around how many customers we're going to have with this new product, what the average price point is going to be, what the cost of marketing will be to generate enough leads to get the amount of customers that we need. Those types of things will be all part of the financial roll up. And then the most important part is roles and responsibilities. And I think back in episode 2, I talked about the concept of, treating the business, the initiative, like you would a football game, where you've got players on the field that each have a specific role. That's critically important with strategy as well. So, everybody has a role to play, which means that everybody needs to understand the strategy and what their role in making it happen actually is. I always equate it to, an environment that really prospers is an environment where it's very transparent, it's honest, it's forthcoming in terms of where we are and what's happening and what we're experiencing, so that the team can rally and say, okay, this is our strategy, this is my role. I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm going to hold myself accountable to that. And as things happen that we didn't expect, we're going to continue to talk about it and make changes as we go.
And who is typically involved in creating this kind of strategic plan?
So the strategic plan, in my experience, is best done with a cross-functional group of folks. So there can be, a leader of the strategic planning process, and I played that role a number of times. But I am not the guy in that role that is going to create every level of detail of the strategic plan itself. I'm going to facilitate the discussions that are going to lead us as a group to the point of understanding what our strategy needs to be. So, in most cases, that's going to mean that you've got financial people involved, you have the leadership team involved, you have marketing people involved, you have sales people involved, production people or engineering people involved, product management people involved. And the reason is because you want to get all those perspectives and you want to document everything you can document as it relates to, where we need to go. And then through lots of discussion, it's to vet what we think we need to go do. What are the most important things? What's the best approach? What do we know about the market and the customer base, and where can we get feedback on things as we have questions? That needs to be a cross-functional affair with leadership very much front and center as part of the process.
You've obviously, with your amount of experience, you've done a lot of strategic planning. Have you found there to be any pitfalls involved?
Well, what I found is that certain companies do this really well and certain companies don't. Some companies don't do it at all, and they're kind of, in that model of what I talked about earlier, where there's a lot of activity and a lot of busyness, but they're not really advancing from a strategic standpoint in any particular direction, and that can be kind of a chaotic environment and not one that we want to replicate. But even with companies that do have strategic planning processes in place, sometimes what happens is they put a plan in place and it's developed by one or two people, but it's not really vetted with the cross-functional group that I talked about, and so it's not very well informed. And when it's all said and done, a lot of times what happens is they build the plan, they present it, everybody sort of nods their heads, and then it gets put on a shelf and not looked at again for another 12 months. So they have a plan technically, but it's not well vetted, it's not well thought out, it's not been challenged, and it really doesn't even get put into place because people weren't really even bought in, and it was more of an academic exercise than it was anything having to do with the practice of the business.
So you really can't just go through the motions when you're doing marketing strategy.
No, I mean, and again, I'm talking about, big M marketing here, right? Where we're looking at macro trends and we're looking at, what's happening in the industry and how we're going to react to it to succeed and grow the business. But you can't. I mean, this is an effort that typically takes months, and it's oftentimes, it starts in the fall and it's put into place at the end of December, or early part of January. So, by the time you get to the first of the year, you're off and running. But it has to be something that makes sense, that everybody is bought into, and that's as well vetted as it can be at that point in time. And again, what's going to happen is, you get to February or March or, May or June, and you're going to realize that some of the assumptions, some of the things that we have in the strat plan aren't necessarily quite right. And so you're going to course correct. Some of this is experimentation, and some of it's going to require additional market research and closing some of the gaps that you discovered along the way. But that's okay. It's a journey. It's not, you don't write a strat plan and say we're going to follow every letter of the strat plan, or we're not going to vary from it whatsoever. You want to use that as the guideline for what you're planning to do in a given year, and then course correct as you go.
Yeah, I would think one of the central tenets, best practices, if you will, of creating a good big M marketing strategy is adaptability, right? Because conditions change, economic conditions change, circumstances change, supply chain issues arise, et cetera. So there has to be, I imagine, some adaptability built into that plan.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think about some recent examples of some of the big macro things that you're talking about, when the pandemic happened back in 2020, that changed everything. You mentioned supply chain. That was a huge part of what happened. So, I can tell you that the businesses that I was associated with at that point in time, all of a sudden started experiencing, really difficult to get parts and components and that sort of thing. And when they could get them, they had to start paying a lot more money for them, and they were just grabbing what they could grab because without them, they were out of business. So they started to pay much higher prices, and that had an impact on pricing. because they had to pass some of that through to the end consumer. So that's one example. Another example would be, what I think is probably coming, and that is, that the indicators are that sometime next year in 2024 we're going to experience a mild recession. Well, that has an impact as well. So, at the point where you've got recession, it means that growth is going in a negative direction, and that's going to impact not all products, but some products. And so, pretty good chance that for a lot of companies, it's going to keep the revenue flat or even in a decreased place. And with that, they probably have to start thinking through restructuring plans and that sort of thing. So yeah, things happen, and it's not always within our control. But the idea of the strat plan is to control what we can control, and be flexible enough so that when things out of our control happen, we can react in a way that isn't devastating.
So as we wrap up this conversation on the basics of strategy when it comes to marketing, what do you think the most important thing is to remember when making a strategic plan?
More than anything, it's to have it be as well informed as it can be. And again, that's market research, that's internal knowledge, that's talking with customers. It's understanding what the competition does, what the macro trends are, and that sort of thing. So, everything that we know about what's happening in our ecosystem, that needs to be considered when the strat plan comes together. And the second thing is just making sure that the effort is cross-functional, and by the time that the plan is ready to be put into place, everybody that plays a role is aware of what the plan is and understands, they're part of that, so that they can execute in a way that sets themselves up to succeed, but also sets the company up to succeed.
Well, strategy is obviously a very foundational component of marketing. And Mike, we appreciate your insights today. Thanks for joining us on this latest episode of the Let's Talk Growth podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.